All right, we are just a little past 8 o'clock. The pre-roll ads have run on Twitch, so I think we are ready to get started. So, grab a drink, pull up a chair, and get comfy, because we're getting back to an old friend. So, let's shift back over, because tonight we have a couple stories from the troubled mind of H.P. Lovecraft. Welcome back. I think I'm a little too high here. Hang on. Let me adjust my positioning. One of these days I will get it just right. It's really a matter of posture, I believe. When I'm leaning forward, the tracking has me way up there. Anyway, so we're starting back in to work through some of our backlog. When we were just getting started, mostly on YouTube, we started reading H.P. Lovecraft. We read the big ones. We read Mountains of Madness. We read Call of Cthulhu. We read really most of the big ones. While we were on that kick, we read King in Yellow. We read a lot of similar things. And I've realized we've got probably about 5 or 10 of his short stories just sitting there, moldering in the backlog. And that we just can't have that. So, to rectify the situation, and a little bit of a celebration, we hit, as I may have mentioned, we hit 50 follows on Twitch last time, which is a fantastically round number and a good milestone. It's just a little bit short of what the YouTube channel's at. So we're doing very well for ourselves. We're growing and cultivating our little community very nicely. I wouldn't have it any other way. A nice slow burn is the best kind. So, in celebration of that, we're going back to an old comfort read with H.P. Lovecraft, which actually says quite a lot about us if Lovecraft is our comfort read. But let's try not to delve too deeply into that, shall we? That way lay madness. But yes, so we have just a few of these short stories remaining. At least of the one when the last time I had looked through Gutenberg for what was available in the public domain. So once we get through these, we'll probably shift gears and see if there's anything that's newly arrived. Because I think I hadn't looked for anything that had fallen into public domain this year. But we'll see. We'll see. It's fine. It's fine. Yeah, that's what we all say. So yeah, let's just settle in. I'm not sure. Most of these are reasonably short, so we'll probably finish this first one without very much time taken off the clock, if I'm being entirely honest. And we'll just sort of find our way. Maybe we can get through 2 tonight. Maybe this one will take their full time. I don't do the homework. That's meh. And it's also, yeah, we didn't do this just because I couldn't decide on a book. No. No, this was certainly planned. Alright, let's go ahead and shift over to our reading nook, and we'll start tonight's selection, with The Lurking Fear by H.P. Lovecraft. Part 1. The Shadow on the Chimney. There was thunder in the air on the night I went to the deserted mansion atop Tempest Mountain to find the lurking fear. I was not alone, for foolhardiness was not then mixed with that love of the grotesque and the terrible, which has made my career a series of quests for strange horrors in literature and in life. With me, were two faithful and muscular men, whom I had sent when the time came. Men long associated with me in my ghastly explorations because of their peculiar fitness. We had started quietly from the village because of the reporters who still lingered about after the eldritch panic of a month before, the nightmare creeping death. Later, I thought they might aid me, but I did not want them then. Would to God I had let them share the search, that I might not have had to bear the secret alone so long. To bear it alone for fear the world would call me mad, or go mad itself at the demon implications of the thing. Now that I'm telling it anyway, lest the brooding make me a maniac, I wish I had never concealed it. For I, and I only, know what manner of fear lurked on that spectral and desolate mountain. In a small motor car, we covered the miles of primeval forest and hill until the wooded descent checked it. The country bore an aspect more than usually sinister, as we viewed it by night and without the accustomed crowds of investigators, so that we were often tempted to use the acetylene headlights despite the attention it might attract. It was not a wholesome landscape after dark, and I believe I would have noticed its morbidity even had I been ignorant of the terror that stalked there. Of wild creatures there were none. They're wise when death leers close. The ancient lightning-scarred trees seemed unnaturally large and twisted, and the other vegetation unnaturally thick and feverish, while curious mounds and hummocks in the weedy, fulgurite-pitted earth reminded me of snakes, and dead men's skulls swelled to gigantic proportions. Fear had lurked on Tempest Mountain for more than a century. This I learned at once from newspaper accounts of the catastrophe which first brought the region to the world's notice. The place is a remote, lonely elevation in that part of the Catskills where Dutch civilization once feebly and transiently penetrated, leaving behind, as it receded, only a few ruined mansions and a degenerate squatter population inhabiting pitiful hamlets on isolated slopes. Normal beings seldom visited the locality till the state police were formed, and even now only infrequent troopers patrol it. The fear, however, is an old tradition throughout the neighboring villages, since it is a prime topic in the simple discourse of the poor mongrels who sometimes leave their valleys to trade hand-woven baskets for such primitive necessities as they cannot shoot, raise, or make. The lurking fear dwelt in the shunned and deserted Martine's mansion. Martens? Which crowned the high but gradual eminence, whose liability to frequent thunderstorms gave it the name of Tempest Mountain. For over 100 years, the antique grove-circled stone house had been the subject of stories incredibly wild and monstrously hideous. Stories of a silent, colossal, creeping death, which stalked abroad in summer. With whimpering insistence, the squatters told tales of a demon which seized lone wayfarers after dark, either carrying them off or leaving them in a frightful state of gnawed dismemberment, while sometimes they whispered of blood trails toward the distant mansion. Some said the thunder called the lurking fear out of its habitation, while others said the thunder was its voice. No one outside the backwoods believed these varying and conflicting stories, with their incoherent, extravagant descriptions of the half-glimpsed fiend. Yet, not a farmer or villager doubted the Martens' mansion was ghoulishly haunted. Local history forbade such a doubt, although no ghostly evidence was ever found by such investigators as had visited the building after some especially vivid tales of the squatters. Grandmothers told strange myths of the Martens spectre. Myths concerning the Martens family itself, its queer, hereditary dissimilarity of eyes, its long, unnatural annals, and the murder which had cursed it. The terror which brought me to the scene was a sudden and portentous confirmation of the mountaineers' wildest legends. One summer night, after a thunderstorm of unprecedented violence, the countryside was aroused by a squatter stampede, which no mere delusion could create. The pitiful throngs of natives shrieked and whined of the unnameable horror which had descended upon them, and they were not doubted. They had not seen it, but had heard such cries from one of their hamlets that they knew a creeping death had come. In the morning, citizens and state troopers followed the shuddering mountaineers to the place where they had said the death had come. Death was indeed there. The ground under one of the squatters' villages had caved in after a lightning strike, destroying several of the malodorous shanties. But upon this property damage was superimposed an organic devastation, which paled into insignificance. Of a possible 75 natives who had inhabited this spot, not one living specimen was visible. The disordered earth was covered with blood, and human debris bespeaking too vividly the ravages of demon teeth and talons. Yet, no visible trail led away from the carnage. That some hideous animal must be the cause, everyone quickly agreed. Nor did any tongue now revive the charge that such cryptic deaths formed merely the sordid murders common in decadent communities. That charge was revived only when about 25 of the estimated population were found missing from the dead. And even then it was hard to explain the murder of 50 by half that number. But the fact remained that, on a summer night, a bolt had come out of the heavens and left a dead village, whose corpses were horribly mangled, chewed, and clawed. The excited countryside immediately connected the horror with the haunted Martens' mansion. Though the localities were over 3 miles apart, the troopers were more skeptical, including the mansion only casually in their investigations and dropping it altogether when they found it thoroughly deserted. Country and village people, however, canvassed the place with infinite care, overturning everything in the house, sounding ponds and brooks, beating down bushes, and ransacking the nearby forests. All was in vain. The death that had come had left no trace save destruction itself. By the second day of the search, the affair was fully treated by the newspapers, whose reporters overran Tempest Mountain. They described it in much detail, and with many interviews to elucidate the horror's history as told by local grandams. I followed the accounts languidly at first, for I am a connoisseur in horrors. But after a week I detected an atmosphere which stirred me oddly, so that on August 5th, 1921, I registered among the reporters who crowded the hotel at Lefebvre's Corners, nearest village to Tempest Mountain, and acknowledged headquarters of the searchers. 3 weeks more, and the dispersal of the reporters left me free to begin a terrible exploration. based on the minute inquiries and surveying with which I had meanwhile busied myself. So, on this summer night, while distant thunder rumbled, I left a silent motor car and tramped with 2 armed companions up the mound-covered reaches of Tempest Mountain, casting the beams of an electric torch on the spectral gray walls that began to appear through the giant oaks ahead. In this morbid night, solitude and feeble shifting illumination, the vast box-like pile displayed obscure hints of terror, which day could not uncover. Yet I did not hesitate, since I had come with fierce resolution to test an idea. I believed that the thunder called the death demon out of some fearful secret place, and be that demon solid entity or vaporous pestilence, I meant to see it. I think this might be one of the earlier pieces by Lovecraft, now that we're getting the timetables set, and I think this one was published in Strange Tales in, like, 26. So, this may be one of the earlier ones. I'm not up to date on the chronology or the publishing history that Lovecraft had, but it's probably on a wiki somewhere, if I'm being entirely honest. I had thoroughly searched the ruin before, hence knew my plan well, choosing, as the seat of my vigil, the old room of Jan Martens, whose murder looms so great in the rural legends. I felt, subtly, that the apartment of this ancient victim was best for my purposes. The chamber, measuring about 20 feet square, contained, like the other rooms, some rubbish which had once been furniture. It lay on the second story, on the southeast corner of the house, and had an immense east window and narrow south window, both devoid of panes or shutters. Opposite the large window was an enormous Dutch fireplace, with scriptural tiles representing the prodigal son, and opposite the narrow window was a spacious bed built into the wall. As the tree-muffled thunder grew louder, I arranged my plan's details. First, I fastened side by side on the ledge of the large window 3 rope ladders, which I had brought with me. I knew they reached a suitable spot on the grass outside, for I had tested them. Then the 3 of us dragged from another room a wide 4-poster bedstead, crowding it laterally against the window. Having strewn it with fir boughs, all now rested on it with drawn automatics. Okay, with drawn automatics. Something about the way the line wrote just threw me off. 2 relaxing while the 3rd watched. From whatever direction the demon might come, our potential escape was provided. If it came from within the house, we had the window ladders. If from outside, the door and the stairs. We did not think, judging from precedent, that it would pursue us far, even at worst. I watched from midnight to 1 o'clock, when, in spite of the sinister house, the unprotected window, and the approaching thunder and lightning, I felt singularly drowsy. I was between my 2 companions, George Bennett being toward the window and William Toby toward the fireplace. Bennett was asleep, having apparently felt the same anomalous drowsiness which affected me. Okay, yeah, so this was definitely an early one, because he was still writing into the 50s, I think. Bennett was asleep, having apparently felt the same anomalous drowsiness which affected me. so I designated Toby for the next watch, although even he was nodding. It is curious how intently I had been watching that fireplace. 37. Fair. The increasing thunder must have affected my dreams, for in that brief time I slept there came to me apocalyptic visions. Once I partly awaked, probably because the sleeper tore the window and restlessly flung an arm across my chest. I was not sufficiently awake to see whether Toby was attending to his duties as sentinel, but felt a distinct anxiety on that score. Never before had the presence of evil so poignantly oppressed me. Later, I must have dropped asleep, for it was out of a phantasmal chaos that my mind leaped when the night grew hideous with shrieks beyond anything in my former experience or imagination. In that shrieking, the inmost soul of human fear and agony clawed helplessly and insanely at the ebony gates of oblivion. I awoke to red madness and the mockery of diabolism. As farther and farther down inconceivable vistas that phobic and crystalline anguish retreated and reverberated. There was no light, but I knew from the empty space at my right that Toby was gone. God alone knew whither. Across my chest still lay the heavy arm of the sleeper at my left. Then came the devastating stroke of lightning, which shook the whole mountain, lit the darkest crypts of the hoary grove, and splintered the patriarch of the twisted trees. In the demon flash of a monstrous fireball, the sleeper started up, and suddenly, while the glare from beyond the window threw his shadow vividly upon the chimney above the fireplace, from which my eyes had never strayed. That I am still alive and sane is a marvel I cannot fathom. I cannot fathom it. For the shadow on that chimney was not that of George Bennett, or of any other human creature, but a blasphemous abnormality from hell's nethermost craters, a nameless, shapeless abomination which no mind could fully grasp, and no pen even partly describe. In another second, I was alone in the accursed mansion, shivering and gibbering. George Bennett and William Toby had left no trace, not even of a struggle. They were never heard of again. Well, that escalated quickly. And so it is with a wry amusement that I note that even early in his career, Lovecraft pulled the trope of the observer cannot find the words to describe the horror that he witnessed. It just fits so well. It's a good literary device, and it also makes it easier for the author to just not have to describe things. It does make things rather more difficult for potential adaptations, however. It does just leave things up to the interpreter's decision, how they'd like to have the unknowable, unthinkable horror be portrayed. Alright. Part 2. A Passer in the Storm. For days after that hideous experience in the forest-swathed mansion, I lay nervously exhausted in my hotel room at Lefaire's Corners. I do not remember exactly how I managed to reach the motor car, started, and slip unobserved back to the village, for I retain no distinct impression, save of wild-armed titan trees, demoniac mutterings of thunder, and Charonian shadows athwart the low mounds that dotted and streaked the region. Yeah, way ahead of his time there. He is an early adopter of the found footage before the advent of footage. As I shivered and brooded on the casting of that brain-blasting shadow, I knew that I had at last pried out one of Earth's supreme horrors. One of those nameless blights of outer voids whose faint demon scratchings we sometimes hear on the farthest rim of space. Yet, from which our own finite vision has given us merciful immunity. The shadow I had seen, I hardly dared to analyze or identify. Something had lain between me and the window that night, but I shuddered whenever I could not cast off the instinct to classify it. If it had only snarled or bayed or laughed titteringly, even that would have relieved the abysmal hideousness. But it was so silent. It had rested a heavy arm or foreleg on my chest. Obviously, it was organic, or had once been organic. Jan Hortense, whose room I had invaded, was buried in the graveyard near the mansion. I must find Bennett and Toby, if they lived. Why had it picked them and left me for the last? Drowsiness is so stifling, and dreams are so horrible. In a short time, I realized that I must tell my story to someone, or break down completely. I had already decided not to abandon the quest for the lurking fear, for in my rash ignorance it seemed to me that uncertainty was worse than enlightenment, however terrible the latter might prove to be. Accordingly, I revolved in my mind the best course to pursue, whom to select for my confidences, and how to track down the thing which had obliterated two men and cast a nightmare shadow. My chief acquaintances at Laferre's Corners had been the affable reporters, of whom several still remained to collect final echoes of the tragedy. It was from these that I determined to choose a colleague, and the more I reflected, the more my preference inclined toward one Arthur Monroe, a dark, lean man of about 35, whose education, taste, intelligence, and temperament all seemed to mark him as one not bound to conventional ideas and experiences. On an afternoon in early September, Arthur Monroe listened to my story. I saw from the beginning that he was both interested and sympathetic. And when I had finished, he analyzed and discussed the thing with the greatest shrewdness and judgment. His advice, moreover, was eminently practical, for he recommended a postponement of operations at the Martens' mansion until we might become fortified with more detailed historical and geographical data. On his initiative, we combed the countryside for information regarding the terrible Martens family and discovered a man who possessed a marvelously illuminating ancestral diary. We also talked at length with such of the mountain mongrels as had not fled from the terror and confusion to remoter slopes, and arranged to proceed our culminating task, the exhaustive and definitive examination of the mansion in the light of its detailed history, with an equally exhaustive and definitive examination of spots associated with the various tragedies of squatter legend. The results of this examination were not at first very enlightening, though our tabulation of them seemed to reveal a a fairly significant trend. Namely, that the number of reported horrors was by far the greatest in areas either comparatively near the avoided house, or connected with it by stretches of the morbidly overnourished forest. There were, it is true, exceptions. Indeed, the horror which had caught the world's ear had happened in a treeless space remote alike from the mansion and from any connecting woods. As to the nature and appearance of the lurking fear, nothing could be gained from the scared and witless shanty dwellers. In the same breath they called it a snake and a giant, a thunder devil and a bat, a vulture and a walking tree. We did, however, deem ourselves justified in assuming that it was a living organism, highly susceptible to electrical storms. And although certain of the stories suggested wings, we believed that its aversion for open spaces made land locomotion a more probable theory. The only thing really incompatible with the latter view was the rapidity with which the creature must have traveled in order to perform all the deeds attributed to it. When we came to know the squatters better, we found them curiously likable in many ways. Simple animals they were, gently descending the evolutionary scale because of their unfortunate ancestry and stultifying isolation. That is the nicest way I've ever heard someone describe inbred hicks. Well done, Lovecraft. Well done. They feared outsiders, but slowly grew accustomed to us, finally helping vastly when we beat down all the thickets and tore out all the partitions of the mansion in our search for the lurking fear. When we asked them to help us find Bennett and Toby, they were truly distressed. They wanted to help us, yet knew that these victims had gone as wholly out of the world as their own missing people. That great numbers of them had actually been killed and removed, just as the wild animals had long been exterminated. We were, of course, thoroughly convinced, and we waited apprehensively for further tragedies to occur. By the middle of October, we were puzzled by our lack of progress. Owing to the clear nights, no demoniac aggressions had taken place, and the completeness of our vain searches of house and country almost drove us to regard the lurking fear as a non-material agency. We feared that the cold weather would come on and halt our explorations, for all agreed that the demon was generally quiet in winter. Thus there was a kind of haste and desperation in our last daylight canvass of the horror-visited hamlet. Hamlet now deserted because of the squatters' fears. The ill-fated squatter hamlet had borne no name, but had long stood in a sheltered, though treeless, cleft between two elevations called respectively Cone Mountain and Maple Hill. It was closer to Maple Hill than to Cone Mountain, some of the crude abodes indeed being dugouts on the side of the former eminence. Geographically, it lay about 2 miles northwest of the base of Tempest Mountain, and 3 miles from the oak-girt mansion. Over the distance between the hamlet and the mansion, fully 2 miles and a quarter on the hamlet's side was entirely open country, the plain being of fairly level character, save for some of the low, snake-like mounds, and having as vegetation only grass and scattered weeds. Considering this topography, we had finally concluded that the demon must have come by way of Cone Mountain, a wooded, southern prolongation of which ran to within a short distance of the westernmost spur of Tempest Mountain. The upheaval of ground we traced conclusively to a landslide from Maple Hill, a tall, lone splintered tree, on whose side had been the striking point of the thunderbolt which summoned the fiend. As for the 20th time or more, Arthur Monroe and I went minutely over every inch of the violated village. We were filled with a certain discouragement, coupled with vague and novel fears. It was acutely uncanny, even when frightful and uncanny things were common, to encounter so blankly clueless a scene after such overwhelming occurrences. And we moved about beneath the leaden darkening sky with that tragic, directionless zeal, which results more from a combined sense of futility and necessity of action. Our care was gravely minute. Every cottage was again entered. Every hillside dug out, again searched for bodies. Every thorny foot of adjacent slope again scanned for dens and caves, but all without result. And yet, as I have said, vague new fears hovered menacingly over us, as if giant bat-winged griffins squatted invisibly on the mountain tops and leered with Abaddon eyes that had looked on trans-cosmic gulfs. As the afternoon advanced, it became increasingly difficult to see, and we heard the rumble of a thunderstorm gathering over Tempest Mountain. This sound in such a locality naturally stirred us, though less than it would have done at night. As it was, we hoped desperately that the storm would last until well after dark, and with that hope turned from our aimless hillside searching toward the nearest inhabited hamlet, to gather a body of squatters as helpers in the investigation. Timid as they were, a few of the younger men were sufficiently inspired by our protective leadership to promise such help. We had hardly more than turned, however, when there descended such a blinding sheet, torrential rain, that shelter became imperative. The extreme, almost nocturnal darkness of the sky caused us to stumble sadly, but guided by the frequent flashes of lightning and by our minute knowledge of the hamlet, we soon reached the least porous cabin of the lot. An heterogeneous combination of logs and boards whose still existing door and single tiny window both faced Maple Hill. Barring the door after us against the fury of the wind and rain, we put in place the crude window shutter, which our frequent searches had taught us where to find. It was dismal, sitting there on rickety boxes in the pitchy darkness, but we smoked pipes and occasionally flashed our pocket lamps out. Now and then we could see the lightning through cracks in the wall. The afternoon was so incredibly dark that each flash was extremely vivid. The stormy vigil reminded me, shudderingly, of my ghastly night on Tempest Mountain. My mind turned to that odd question, which had kept recurring ever since the nightmare thing had happened. And again, I wondered why the demon, approaching the three watchers either from the window or the interior, had begun with the men on each side, and left the middle man till the last, when the Titan fireball had scared it away. Why had it not taken its victims in natural order, with myself second, or from whichever direction it had approached? With what manner of far-reaching tentacles did it prey? Or did it know that I was the leader, and saved me for a fate worse than that of my companions? In the midst of these reflections, as if dramatically arranged to intensify them, there fell nearby a terrific bolt of lightning, followed by the sound of sliding earth. At the same time, the wolfish wind rose to demoniac crescendos of ululation. We were sure that the lone tree on Maple Hill had been struck again, and Monroe rose from his box and went to the tiny window to ascertain the damage. When he took down the shutter, the wind and rain howled deafeningly in, so that I could not hear what he said, but I waited while he leaned out and tried to fathom nature's pandemonium. Gradually, a calming of the wind and dispersal of the unusual darkness told of the storm's passing. I had hoped it would last into the night and to help our quest, but a furtive sunbeam from a knothole behind me removed the likelihood of such a thing, suggesting to Monroe that we had better get some light, even if more showers came. I unbarred and opened the crude door. The ground outside was a singular mass of mud and pools, with fresh heaps of earth from the slight landside. But I saw nothing to justify the interest which kept my companion silently leaning out the window. Crossing to where he leaned, I touched his shoulder, but he did not move. Then, as I playfully shook him and turned him around, I felt the strangling tendrils of a cancerous horror whose roots reached into illimitable past and fathomless abysms of the night that broods beyond time. For Arthur Monroe was dead, and on what remained of his chewed and gouged head there was no longer a face. Alright, that brings to the end of part 2. And there was, random death of the curious reporter brought in. That you didn't even look away for a moment. Turned to grab a light and boom, gone. No sound, no nothing. Just sitting there, not even bothered to knock him off his perch. Just slurp, ate his face. Well, I'll be damned. Alright, part 3. What the red glare meant. On the tempest-racked night of November 8th, 1921, with a lantern which cast charnel shadows, I stood digging alone and idiotically in the grave of Jan Martens. I had begun to dig in the afternoon because a thunderstorm was brewing, and now that it was dark and the storm had burst above the maniacally thick foliage, I was glad. I believe that my mind was partly unhinged by events since August 5th. The demon's shadow in the mansion, the general strain and disappointment, and the thing that occurred at the hamlet in an October storm. After that thing, I dug a grave for one whose death I could not understand. I knew that others could not understand either, so let them think Arthur Monroe had wandered away. They searched, but found nothing. The squatters might have understood, but I dared not frighten them more. I myself seemed strangely callous. That shock at the mansion had done something to my brain, and I could think only of the quest for a horror now grown to a cataclysmic stature in my imagination. A quest which the fate of Arthur Monroe made me vow to keep silent and solitary. The scene of my excavations would, alone, have been enough to unnerve any ordinary man. Hey, Neff! Baleful primal trees of unholy size, age, and grotesqueness leered above me like the pillars of some hellish druidic temple, muffling the thunder, hushing the clawing wind, and admitting but little rain. Beyond the scarred trunks in the background, illumined by faint flashes of filtered lightning, rose the damp, ivied stones of the deserted mansion, while somewhat nearer was the abandoned Dutch garden, whose walks and beds were polluted by a white, fungus, fetid, overnourished vegetation that never saw full daylight. And nearest of all was the graveyard, where deformed trees tossed insane branches as their roots displaced unhallowed slabs and sucked venom from what lay below. Now and then, beneath the brown pall of leaves that rotted and festered in the antediluvian forest darkness, I could trace the sinister outlines of some of these low mounds, which characterized the lightning-pierced region. History had led me to this archaic grave. History indeed was all I had, after everything else ended in mocking Satanism. I now believed that the lurking fear was no material thing, but a wolf-fanged ghost that rode the midnight lightning, and I believed, because of the masses of local tradition I had unearthed in my search with Arthur Monroe, that ghost was that of Jan Martens, who died in 1762. That is why I was digging idiotically in his grave. The Martens mansion was built in 1670 by Gerrit Martens, a wealthy New Amsterdam merchant who disliked the changing order under British rule, and had constructed this magnificent domicile on a remote woodland summit, whose untrodden solitude and unusual scenery pleased him. The only substantial disappointments encountered in this site was that which concerned the prevalence of violent thunderstorms in the summer. When selecting the hill and building up his mansion, Mynheer Martens, who had laid these frequent natural outbursts to some peculiarity of the year, but in time he perceived that the locality was especially liable to such phenomena. At length, having found these storms injurious to his head, he fitted up a cellar into which he could retreat from their wildest pandemonium. Of Gerrit Martens's descendants, less is known than of himself, since they were all reared in hatred of the English civilization, and trained to shun those of the colonists as accepted it. Their life was exceedingly secluded, and people declared that their isolation had made them heavy of speech and comprehension. In appearance, all were marked by a peculiar inherited dissimilarity of eyes, one generally being blue and the other brown. Their social contacts grew fewer and fewer, till at last they took to intermarrying with the numerous menial class about the estate. Many of the crowded family degenerated, moved across the valley, and merged with the mongrel population which was, later, to produce the pitiful squatters. The rest had stuck sullenly to their ancestral mansion, becoming more and more clannish and taciturn, yet developing nervous responsiveness to the frequent thunderstorms. Most of this information reached the outside world through young Jan Martens, who, from some kind of restlessness, what, heterochromia? He's like, oh, so weird, oh no. Most of this information reached the outside world through young Jan Martens, who, from some kind of restlessness, joined the colonial army when news of the Albany Convention reached Tempest Mountain. He was the first of Gerrit's descendants to see much of the world, and when he returned in 1760, after 6 years of campaigning, he was hated as an outsider by his father, uncles, and brothers, in spite of his dissimilar Martens eyes. No longer could he share the peculiarities and prejudices of the Martenses, while the very mountain thunderstorms failed to intoxicate him as they had before. Instead, his surroundings depressed him, and he frequently wrote to a friend in Albany of plans to leave the paternal roof. By the spring of 1763, Jonathan Gifford, the Albany friend of Jan Martens, became worried by his correspondent's silence, especially in view of the conditions and quarrels at the Martens mansion. Determined to visit Jan in person, he went into the mountains on horseback. His diary states that he reached Tempest Mountain on September 20th, finding the mansion in great decrepitude. The sullen, odd-eyed Martenses, whose unclean animal aspect shocked him, told him in broken gutturals that Jan was dead. He had, they insisted, been struck by lightning the autumn before, and now lay buried behind the neglected, sunken gardens. They showed the visitor the grave, barren and devoid of markers. Something in the Martenses' manner gave Gifford a feeling of repulsion and suspicion. And a week later he returned with spade and mattock to explore the sepulchral spot. He found what he expected. A skull, crushed cruelly, as if by savage blows. So, returning to Albany, he openly charged the Martenses with the murder of their kinsman. Legal evidence was lacking, but the story spread rapidly around the countryside, and from that time, the Martenses were ostracized by the world. No one would deal with them, and their distant manor was shunned as an accursed place. Somehow, they managed to live on, independently by the products of their estate, for occasional lights glimpsed from faraway hills attested their continued presence. These lights were seen as late as 1810, but toward the last they became very infrequent. Meanwhile, there grew up about the mansion and the mountain a body of diabolic legendary. The place was avoided with doubled assiduousness, and invested with every whispered myth tradition could supply. It remained unvisited until 1816, when the continued absence of lights was noticed by the squatters. At that time, a party made investigations, finding the house deserted and partly in ruins. There were no skeletons about, so that departure rather than death was inferred. The clan seemed to have left several years before, and improvised penthouses show how numerous it had grown prior to its migration. Its cultural level had fallen very low, as proved by decaying furniture and scattered silverware, which must have been long abandoned when its owners left. But though the dreaded Martenses were gone, the fear of the haunted house continued, and grew very acute, when new and strange stories arose among the mountain decadents. There it stood, deserted, feared, and linked with the vengeful ghost of Jan Martens. There it still stood, on the night I dug in Jan Martens' grave. All right, we got an ad kicking up in about 2 minutes, so let's have a short pause before we go back into, or go right on into the next section. So, you got a little bit of heterochromia. Is it the kind where each iris is different, or is it the split iris kind? Oh, okay. So, probably in certain lights you could pass as not having heterochromia at all. So probably would need to be paying attention. The gray and blue is very easy to mix up. My brother's got, depending on the light, pale sky blue eyes, and in others it's like slate gray. It really just depends on how you look at it. So, cool. Very cool. So yeah, let's add that to the... Yep. To add that to the pile, Lovecraft is uncomfortable with heterochromia. He's uncomfortable with gypsies. He's uncomfortable with really anything that isn't exactly his brand of white European. Not only white European, but white European immigrant to the New England area. Literally anything that is not fitting in that very, very tiny box made Lovecraft uncomfortable. So, it's not very difficult to find yourself in some of his categories. Oh no! Oh no! The decadence it shows! Oh. If Lovecraft wasn't getting better before he died, this would be much less funny. The fact that he realized that he was irrationally afraid of these things and was trying to do better, if he'd never reformed himself, this would be much less funny. But he did, so we can joke and laugh about it. He realized he was being an ass. That's all we can really ask for, right? Is do better. Exactly, yeah. If he'd never gotten better, this would be an entirely different conversation. All right, our ads are about to kick off, so let's go ahead and take a short break. Stand up, stretch your legs, top up your drinks, attend to your fuzzy friends, and we'll be back in just a few minutes when these ads are done. Alright, I do believe we are back. So, let's go ahead and settle back in and continue to unravel the mystery of the lurking fear. I have described my protracted digging as idiotic. And such it indeed was in object and method. The coffin of Jan Martens had been soon unearthed. It now held only dust and niter. But in my fury to exhume his ghost, I delved irrationally and clumsily down beneath where he had lain. God knows what I expected to find. Only felt that I was digging in the grave of a man whose ghost stalked by night. It is impossible to say what monstrous depth I had attained when my spade, and soon my feet, broke through the ground beneath. The event, under the circumstances, was tremendous, for in the existence of a subterranean space here, my mad theories had terrible confirmation. My slight fall had extinguished the lantern, but I produced an electric pocket lamp, and viewed the small horizontal tunnel which led away indefinitely in both directions. It was amply large for a man to wriggle through, and though no sane person would have tried it at that time, I forgot danger, reason, and cleanliness in my single-minded fever to unearth the lurking fear. Choosing the direction toward the house, I scrambled recklessly into the narrow burrow, squirming ahead blindly and rapidly, and flashing but seldom the lamp I kept before me. What language can describe the spectacle of a man lost in infinitely abysmal earth, pawing, twisting, wheezing, scrambling madly through sunken convolutions of immemorial blackness, without an idea of time, safety, direction, or definite object? There is something hideous in it, but that is what I did. I did it for so long that life faded to a far memory, and I became one with the moles and grubs of nighted depths. Indeed, it was only by accident that after interminable writhings, I jarred my forgotten electric lamp alight, so that it shone eerily along the burrow of caked loam that stretched and curved ahead. I had been scrambling in this way for some time, so that my battery had burned very low, when the passage suddenly inclined sharply upward, altering my mode of progress. And as I raised my glance, it was without preparation that I saw glistening in the distance two demoniac reflections of my expiring lamp. Two reflections, glowing with a baneful and unmistakable effulgence, and provoking maddeningly nebulous memories. I stopped automatically, though lacking the brain to retreat. The eyes approached. Yet of the thing that bore them, I could distinguish only a claw. But what a claw! Then, far overhead, I heard a faint crashing, which I recognized. It was the wild thunder of the mountain raised to hysteric fury. I must have been crawling upward for some time, so that the surface was now quite near. And as the muffled thunder clattered, those eyes still stared with vacuous viciousness. Thank God, I did not then know what it was, else I should have died. But I was saved by the very thunder that had summoned it, for after a hideous wait, there burst from the unseen outside sky one of those frequent mountainward bolts, whose aftermath I had noticed here and there as gashes of disturbed earth and fulgurites of various sizes. With cyclopean rage, it tore through the soil above that damnable pit, blinding and deafening me, yet not wholly reducing me to a coma. Hey, Star. In the chaos of sliding, shifting earth, I clawed and floundered helplessly till the rain on my head steadied me, and I saw that I had come to the surface in a familiar spot. A steep, unforested place on the southwest slope of the mountain. Recurrent sheet lightnings illumined the tumbled ground and the remains of the curious low hummock which had stretched down from the wooded higher slope. There was nothing in the chaos to show my place of egress from the lethal catacomb. My brain was as great a chaos as the earth, and as a distant red glare burst on the landscape from the south, I hardly realized the horror I had been through. But when, 2 days later, the squatters told me what the red glare meant, I felt more horror than that which the mold burrow and the claw and eyes had given. More horror because of the overwhelming implications. In a hamlet 20 miles away, an orgy of fear had followed the bolt which brought me above ground, and a nameless thing had dropped from an overhanging tree into a weak-roofed cabin. It had done a deed. But the squatters had fired the cabin in frenzy before it could escape, and it had been doing that deed at the very moment the earth caved in on the thing with the claw and eyes. Alright, well, that part may have been what the red glare means, but Lovecraft was not so kind as to illuminate what the red glare actually meant, leaving us in the dark as much as our narrator here was wandering through the dark. Please, just tell me. What does it mean? What does it mean? Ay, ay, ay. Part 4. The horror in the eyes. There can be nothing normal in the mind of one who, knowing what I knew of the horrors of Tempest Mountain, would seek alone for the fear that lurked there. That at least 2 of the fear's embodiments were destroyed formed but a slight guarantee of mental and physical safety in this acheron of multiform diabolism. Yet I continued my quest, with even greater zeal as events and revelations became more monstrous. When, 2 days after my frightful crawl through the crypt of the eyes and claw, I learned that a thing had malignly hovered 20 miles away. At the same instant the eyes were glaring at me, I experienced virtual convulsions of fright. But that fright was so mixed with wonder and alluring grotesqueness that it was almost a pleasant sensation. Sometimes, in the throes of a nightmare, when unseen powers whirl over the roofs of strange dead cities toward the grinning chasm of Nice, it is a relief, and even a delight, to shriek wildly and throw oneself voluntarily along with the hideous vortex of dream doom down into whatever bottomless gulf may yawn. And so it was with the waking nightmare of Tempest Mountain. The discovery that 2 monsters had haunted the spot gave me ultimately a mad craving to plunge into the very earth of the accursed region, and with bare hands dig out the death that leered from every inch of the poisonous soil. As soon as possible, I visited the grave of Jan Martens and dug vainly where I had dug before. Some extensive cave-in had obliterated all trace of the underground passage, while the rain had washed so much earth back into the excavation that I could not tell how deeply I had dug that other day. I likewise made a difficult trip to the distant hamlet where the death creature had been burnt, and was little repaid for my trouble. In the ashes of the fateful cabin I found several bones, but apparently none of the monsters. The squatters said the thing had only one victim, but in this I judged them inaccurate. Since, besides the complete skull of a human being, there was another bony fragment, which seemed certainly to have belonged to a human skull at some time. Though the rapid drop of the monster had been seen, no one could say just what the creature was like. Those who had glimpsed it called it simply a devil. Examining the giant tree where it had lurked, I could discern no distinctive marks. I tried to find some trail into the black forest, but on this occasion could not stand the sight of those morbidly large boles, or of those vast, serpent-like roots that twisted so malevolently before they sank into the earth. My next step was to re-examine with microscopic care the deserted hamlet, where death had come most abundantly, and where Arthur Monroe had seen something he never lived to describe. Though my vain previous searches had been exceedingly minute, I now had new data to test, for my horrible grave crawl convinced me that at least one of the phases of the monstrosity had been an underground creature. This time, on the 14th of November, my quest concerned itself mostly with the slopes of Cone Mountain and Maple Hill, where they overlook the unfortunate hamlet. And I gave particular attention to the loose earth of the landslide region on the latter eminence. The afternoon of my search brought nothing to light, and dusk came as I stood on Maple Hill, looking down at the hamlet and across the valley to Tempest Mountain. There had been a gorgeous sunset, and now the moon came up, nearly full and shedding a silver flood over the plain, the distant mountainside, and the curious low mounds that rose here and there. It was a peaceful Arcadian scene, but knowing what it hid, I hated it. I hated the mocking moon, the hypocritical plain, the festering mountain, and those sinister mounds. Everything seemed to me tainted with a loathsome contagion, and inspired by a noxious alliance with distorted hidden powers. Presently, as I gazed abstractedly at the moonlit panorama, my eye became attracted by something singular in the nature and arrangement of a certain topographical element. Without having any exact knowledge of geology, I had from the first been interested in the odd mounds and hummocks of the region. I had noticed that they were pretty widely distributed around Tempest Mountain, though less numerous on the plain than near the hilltop itself, where prehistoric glaciation had doubtless found feebler opposition to its striking and fantastic caprices. Now, in the light of that low moon which cast long, weird shadows, it struck me forcibly that the various points and lines of the mound system had a peculiar relation to the summit of Tempest Mountain. That summit was, undeniably, a center from which the lines or rows of points radiated indefinitely and irregularly, as if the unwholesome Martin's mansion had thrown out visible tentacles of terror. The idea of such tentacles gave me an unexplained thrill, and I stopped to analyze my reason for believing these mounds glacial phenomena. The more I analyzed, the less I believed, and against my newly opened mind, there began to beat grotesque and horrible analogies based on superficial aspects, and upon my experience beneath the earth. Before I knew it, I was utterly frenzied and uttering frenzied and disjointed words to myself. My God, molehills! The damn place must be honeycombed! How many? That night at the mansion. They took Bennett and Toby first, on each side of us. Then, I was digging frantically. They took Bennett. I was digging frantically into the mound, which had stretched nearest me, digging desperately, shiveringly, but almost jubilantly. Digging, and at last shrieking aloud with some unplaced emotion as I came upon a tunnel or burrow just like the one through which I had crawled on that other demoniac night. Yeah, sure. Yep. Lovecraft being afraid of mole people and being an early adopter of the mole people conspiracy. It actually tracks. It fits pretty perfectly, actually. After that, I recall running, spade in hand, a hideous run across moonlit and mound-marked meadows and through diseased, precipitous abysses of haunted hillside forest, leaping, screaming, panting, bounding toward the terrible Martin's mansion. I recall digging unreasoningly in all parts of the briar-choked cellar, digging to find the core and center of that malignant universe of mounds. And I recall how I laughed when I stumbled on the passageway, the hole at the base of the old chimney where the thick weeds grew and cast queer shadows in the light of the lone candle I had happened to have with me. It still remained in that hell hive, lurking and waiting for the thunder to arouse it. I did not know. 2 had been killed. Perhaps that had finished it. But still, there remained that burning determination to reach the innermost secret of the fear, which I had once more come to deem definite, material, and organic. My indecisive speculation whether to explore the passage alone and immediately with my pocket light, or to try to assemble a band of squatters for the quest, was interrupted, after a time, by a sudden rush of wind from the outside, which blew out the candle and left me in stark blackness. The moon no longer shone through the chinks and apertures above me, and with a sense of fateful alarm, I heard the sinister and significant rumble of approaching thunder. A confusion of associated ideas possessed my brain, leading me to grope back toward the farthest corner of the cellar. My eyes, however, never turned away from the horrible opening at the base of the chimney, and I began to get glimpses of the crumbling bricks and unhealthy weeds as faint glows of lightning penetrated the woods outside and illumined the chinks in the upper wall. Every second, I was consumed with a mixture of fear and curiosity. What would the storm call forth? Or was there anything left for it to call? Guided by a lightning flash, I settled myself down behind a dense clump of vegetation, through which I could see the opening. without being seen. If heaven is merciful, it will some day efface from my consciousness the sight that I saw, and let me live my last years in peace. I cannot sleep at night now, and have to take opiates when it thunders. The thing came abruptly and unannounced, a demon, rat-like, scurrying from the pits remote and unimaginable, a hellish panting and stifled grunting, and then, from that opening beneath the chimney, a burst of a multitudinous and leprous life, a loathsome night-spawned flood of organic corruption, more devastatingly hideous than the blackest conjurations of mortal madness and morbidity. Seething, stewing, surging, bubbling like serpent slime, it rolled up and out of that yawning hole, spreading like a septic contagion, and streaming from the cellar at every point of egress, streaming out, scatter through the accursed midnight forests, and strew fear, madness, and death. God knows how many there were. There must have been thousands. To see the stream of them in that faint, intermittent lightning was shocking. When they had thinned out enough to be glimpsed as separate organisms, I saw that they were dwarfed, deformed, hairy devils or apes, monstrous, diabolic caricatures of the monkey tribe. They were so hideously silent, hardly a squeal when one of the last stragglers turned, with the skill of long practice, to make a meal in accustomed fashion on a weaker companion. Others snapped up what it left and ate with slavering relish. Then, in spite of my days of fright and disgust, my morbid curiosity triumphed, and as the last of the monstrosities oozed up alone from that nether world of unknown nightmare, I drew my automatic pistol and shot it under cover of the thunder. Shrieking, slithering torrential shadows of red, viscous madness chasing one another through endless and sanguine corridors of purple fulgurous sky, formless phantasms and kaleidoscopic mutations of a ghoulish, remembered scene. Forests of monstrous, overnourished oaks with serpent roots twisting and sucking unnameable juices from an earth verminous, with millions of cannibal devils, mound-like tentacles groping from underground nuclei of polypus perversion. Insane lightning over malignant ivied walls, and demon arcades choked with fungus vegetation. Heaven be thanked for the instinct which led me unconscious to places where men dwelt, to the peaceful village that slept under the calm stars of clearing skies. I think this might be the first Lovecraft that we've read since we had the on-screen reader, so I don't have to go hunting for the images, but I do always love how all of the Lovecraft stories that have drawings like this, the pen and or the ink and paper, just the single monocolor, they just fit so well. They're evocative. They don't really describe anything so much as just give you a vibe. And this fits the bill very nicely, especially for one so early. So he was still developing his style. Glad we're on the same thought. Not only do Akamos and I share a brain cell, but Star, you can get in on this. I had recovered enough in a week to send to Albany for a gang of men to blow up the Martens mansion and the entire top of Tempest Mountain with dynamite, stop up all the discoverable mound burrows, and destroy certain overnourished trees whose very existence seemed an insult to sanity. I could sleep a little after they had done this, but true rest will never come, as long as I remember that nameless secret of the lurking fear. The thing will haunt me. For who can say the extermination is complete and that analogous phenomena do not exist all over the world? Who can, with my knowledge, think of the Earth's unknown caverns without a nightmare dread of future possibilities? I cannot see a well or a subway entrance without shuddering. Why cannot the doctors give me something to make me sleep, or truly calm my brain when it thunders? What I saw in the glow of my flashlight after I shot the unspeakable, straggling object was so simple that almost a minute elapsed before I understood and went delirious. The object was nauseous. A filthy, whitish gorilla thing with sharp yellow fangs and matted fur. It was the ultimate product of mammalian degeneration, the frightful outcome of isolated spawning, multiplication, and cannibal nutrition above and below the ground. The embodiment of all the snarling chaos and gritting fear that lurk behind life. It had looked at me as it died, and its eyes had the same odd quality that marked those other eyes which stared at me underground and excited cloudy recollections. One eye was blue, the other brown. They were the dissimilar Martens eyes of the old legends, and I knew in one inundated cataclysm of voiceless horror what had become of that vanished family. The terrible and thunder-crazed House of Martens. Alright, that brings us to the end of The Lurking Fear. So, it's been a little bit since we did Lovecraft, and this one, you can tell it was earlier in his career, as we were talking about earlier at the beginning of stream. This is an early Lovecraft work, published when he was relatively young. He's still developing his style, still getting a feel for the vibe, but despite all that, this has the same element of mystery, the same unknown terror that just eats away at the corners of your mind. You can see that this was a story that was starting up from claustrophobia, agoraphobia. Well, not agoraphobia. Well, maybe a little bit. Yeah, it's got its fingerprints. One of the main things that's different about this one is that we actually have some resolution. That's one thing that we very rarely actually get from a Lovecraft work, is a big reveal of what the thing was. We get hints, we get some shoddy descriptions of unreliable narrators. Very rarely do we get something like this where he's like, I shot something. It was a gorilla mole man that was obviously a descendant of some serious inbreeding by a family that would not leave these hills. That's one of the main differences we've seen. Really, probably the primary difference is that we got the reveal out of this one. Usually Lovecraft will give us hints and leave us to wonder. And that's partly why he's captured the imagination so well, is that there isn't really an answer. There's not a reveal to be had. The monsters and things that go bump in the dark stay in the dark, for the most part. There's certain things that are shown up, like when we read The Mountains of Madness, that was all a big reveal, but that was quite a bit longer and was giving clues and hints of other things in the Lovecraft mythos. So this is a nice shift. Well, I won't really say it's such a shift because it was one of the first ones, so everything that came after was a shift. But all the same, I enjoyed this one. Let's see. We've got about half an hour left. Let's see. I'm going to mark this one as red. Put in the grouping to make sure that it doesn't get mixed back in. Now we have a few left of Lovecraft, and I think some of them are likely quite short. So we can probably fit in something here tonight. We've got, let's see, what do we still have here? There's The Thing on the Doorstep, The Shunned House, Medusa's Coil, which I think is a co-authored piece with Lovecraft, The Case of Charles Dexter Ward. That name sounds familiar. That one actually is, it's a little bit, it might be a little bit long. The Festival, which I don't think we've read it, but I skimmed it. And He. So yeah, we've got a okay, that's what I thought. Was Dexter Ward associated with the Silver Key? I don't remember. Because I know Lovecraft has like two main avenues that he goes. There's the cosmic horror style and the dreams. So it's hard to tell which branch of the Lovecraftian tree you're in at any given story until you're a little ways in. Alright, so I think we probably have time to get through the Festival, I'd say. And I think this one is quite short. Maybe. Yeah. This is... I think it's only... It's a small number of pages. Yeah, let's go ahead and try it. That way we can knock out two of our things from the short list. This one is a little bit more... It's a little different of a style. I'm not sure how well it fits into the overall Lovecraft mythos. It's may not fit in at all. It may be something else that he wrote, but it's got its bones. So let me update our book here. And we can get back into our reading nook. Alright. So, this is another... We're gonna fit in two. If we run a little over, so be it. But we're getting two in tonight. And this is The Festival by H.P. Lovecraft. As advertised here, author of Dagon and The Rats in the Walls, etc. That is very Latin. I'm gonna leave that comment on the image unsaid for now. All right. I was far from home, and the spell of the eastern sea was upon me. In the twilight I heard it pounding on the rocks, and I knew it lay just over the hill where the twisting willows writhed against the clearing sky, and the first stars of evening. And because my fathers had called me to the old town beyond, I pushed on through the shallow, new-fallen snow along the road that soared lonely up to where Aldebaran twinkled among the trees, on toward the very ancient town I had never seen, but often dreamed of. It was the Yuletide, which men call Christmas, though they know in their hearts it is older than Bethlehem and Babylon, older than Memphis and mankind. It was the Yuletide. I had come at last to the ancient sea town, where my people had dwelt and kept festival in the elder time, when festival was forbidden, where also they had commanded their sons to keep festival once every century, that the memory of primal secrets might not be forgotten. Mine were an old people, old even when this land was settled, 300 years before, and they were strange, because they had come as dark, furtive folk from opiate southern gardens of orchids, and spoken another tongue before they learnt the tongue of the blue-eyed fishers. And now they were scattered and shared only the rituals of mysteries that none living could understand. I was the only one who came back that night to the old fishing town, as legend bade, for only the poor and the lonely remember. Then, beyond the hill's crest, I saw Kingsport, outspread frostily in the gloaming, snowy Kingsport with its ancient vanes and steeples, ridgepoles and chimney pots, wharves and small bridges, willow trees and graveyards, endless labyrinths of steep, narrow, crooked streets, and dizzy church-crowned central peak that time durst not touch. Ceaseless mazes of colonial houses piled and scattered at all angles and levels, like a child's disordered blocks. Antiquity, hovering on gray wings over wintered, whitened gables and gambrel roofs. And against the rotting wharves, the sea pounded. The secretive, immemorial sea out of which the people had come in the elder time. Beside the road at its crest, a still higher summit rose, bleak and windswept, and I saw that it was a burying ground, where black gravestones stuck ghoulishly through the snow like the decayed fingernails of a gigantic corpse. The printless road was very lonely, and sometimes I thought I heard a distant, horrible creaking, as of a gibbet in the wind. They had hanged 4 kinsmen of mine for witchcraft in 1692, but I did not know just where. As the road wound down the seaward slope, I listened for the merry sounds of a village at evening, but did not hear them. Then I thought of the season, and felt that these old Puritan folk might well have Christmas customs strange to me, and full of silent hearthside prayer. Yeah, Puritans are all sorts of mysterious. So, after that, I did not listen for merriment or look for wayfarers. They're Puritans, you won't find merriment. But kept on down past the hushed, lighted farmhouses and shadowy stone walls to where the signs of ancient shops and sea taverns creaked in the salt breeze, and the grotesque knockers of pillared doorways glistened along deserted, unpaved lanes in the light of little curtained windows. I had seen maps of the town, and knew where to find the home of my people. It was told that I should be known and welcomed, for village legend lives long. So I hastened through back street to Circle Court and across the fresh snow on the one full flagstone pavement in the town, to where Green Lane leads off behind the market house. I was glad I had chosen to walk. The white village had seemed very beautiful from the hill, and now I was eager to knock at the door of my people. The 7th house on the left in Green Lane, with an ancient peaked roof and jutting second story, all built before 1650. There were lights inside the house when I came upon it, and I saw from the diamond window panes that it must have been kept very close to its antique state. The upper part overhung the narrow grass-grown street, and nearly met the overhanging part of the house opposite, so that I was almost in a tunnel. With a low stone doorstep, wholly free from snow, there was no sidewalk. But many houses had high doors reached by double flights of steps with iron railings. It was an odd scene, and because I was strange to New England, I had never seen its like before. Though it pleased me, I would have relished it better if there had been footprints in the snow, and people in the streets, and a few windows without drawn curtains. When I sounded the archaic iron knocker, I was half afraid. Some fear had been gathering in me, perhaps because of the strangeness of my heritage, and the bleakness of the evening, and the queerness of the silence in that aged town of curious customs. And when my knock was answered, I was fully afraid, because I had not heard any footsteps before the door creaked open. But I was not afraid long. The gowned, slippered old man in the doorway had a bland face that reassured me. And though he made signs that he was dumb, he wrote a quaint and ancient welcome with the stylus and wax tablet he carried. Dumb being speechless. Reminder. He beckoned me into a low candlelit room with massive exposed rafters and dark, stiff, sparse furniture of the 17th century. The past was vivid there. Not an attribute was missing. There was a cavernous fireplace, and a spinning wheel at which a bent old woman in loose wrapper and deep poke bonnet sat back toward me, silently spinning. Despite the festive season, an infinite dampness seemed upon the place, and I marveled that no fire should be blazing. A high-backed settle faced the row of curtained windows at the left, and seemed to be occupied, though I was not sure. I did not like everything about what I saw, and felt again the fear I had had. This fear grew stronger from what had before lessened it. For the more I looked at the old man's bland face, the more its very blandness terrified me. The eyes never moved, and the skin was too like wax. Finally, I was sure it was not a face at all, but a fiendishly cunning mask. But the flabby hands, curiously gloved, wrote genially on the tablet, and told me I must wait a little while before I could be led to the place of festival. Pointing to a chair, table, and pile of books, the old man now left the room, odd comma there, and when I sat down to read, I saw that the books were hoary and moldy, and that they included old Morister's Wild Marvels of Science, the terrible Seducismus Triumphatus of Joseph Glanville, published in 1681, the shocking Demonolatria of Remigius, printed in 1595 at Lyon, and worst of all, the unmentionable Necronomicon of the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred in Olaus Wormius's forbidden Latin translation, a book which I had never seen, but of which I had heard monstrous things whispered. No one spoke to me, but I could hear the creaking of signs in the wind outside, and the whir of the wheel as the bonneted old woman continued her silent spinning. So, I don't know about you, but when I have company, I set a few books out on the coffee table, just to give some, particularly when it's acquaintances but not really friends yet. I set a few books on the coffee table, just to give a feel for my leanings. Whether it be political, literary, etc., or otherwise, it's based on who I expect to be entertaining. This is the same, but, you know, the Necronomicon, Marvels of Science, Seducismus Triumphatus, Demonolatreia. Yeah, okay, yeah. This is a coffee table collection that you'd really only find under the pen of H.P. Lovecraft. I thought the room, and the books, and the people very morbid and disquieting. But because an old tradition of my father's had summoned me to strange feastings, I resolved to expect queer things. So I tried to read, and soon became tremblingly absorbed by something I found in that accursed Necronomicon. A thought, and a legend too hideous for sanity or consciousness. But I disliked it when I fancied I heard the closing of one of the windows that the settle faced, as if it had been stealthily opened. It had seemed to follow a whirring that was not of the old woman's spinning wheel. This was not much, though, for the old woman was spinning very hard, and the aged clock had been striking. After that, I lost the feeling that there were persons on the settle, and I was reading intently and shudderingly when the old man came back booted and dressed in a loose, antique costume, and sat down on that very bench so that I could not see him. It was certainly nervous waiting, and the blasphemous book in my hands made it doubly so. When 11 o'clock struck, however, the old man stood up, glided to a massive carved chest in a corner, and got 2 hooded cloaks, one of which he donned, and the other of which he draped round the old woman, who was ceasing her monotonous spinning. Then they both started for the outer door, the woman lamely creeping, and the old man, after picking up the very book I had been reading, beckoning me as he drew his hood over that unmoving face or mask. I went out into the moonless and tortuous network of that incredibly ancient town. Went out as the lights in the curtained windows disappeared one by one, and the dog star leered at the throng of cowled, cloaked figures that poured silently from every doorway and formed monstrous processions up this street and that, past the creaking signs and antediluvian gables, the thatched roofs, and the diamond-paned windows threading precipitous lanes where decaying houses overlapped and crumbled together, gliding across open courts and churchyards where the bobbing lanterns made eldritch, drunken constellations. And amid these hushed throngs, I followed my voiceless guides, jostled by elbows that seemed preternaturally soft, and pressed by chests and stomachs that seemed abnormally pulpy, but seeing never a face and hearing never a word. Up. The eerie columns slithered, and I saw that all the travelers were converging as they flowed near a sort of focus of crazy alleys at the top of a high hill in the center of the town, where perched a great white church I had seen it from the road's crest when I looked at Kingsport in the new dusk, and it made me shiver, because all the barren had seemed to balance itself a moment on the ghostly spire. There was an open space around the church, partly a churchyard with spectral shafts, and partly a half-paved square swept nearly bare of snow by the wind, and lined with unwholesomely archaic houses. Having peaked roofs and overhanging gables, death fires danced over the tombs, revealing gruesome vistas, though queerly failing to cast any shadows. Past the churchyard, there were no houses. I could see over the hill's summit and watch the glimmer of stars on the harbor, though the town was invisible in the dark. Only once, in a while, a lantern bobbed horribly through serpentine alleys on its way to overtake the throng that was now slipping speechlessly into the church. I waited till the crowd had oozed into the black doorway, until all the stragglers had followed. The old man was pulling at my sleeve, but I was determined to be the last. Then, finally, I went. The sinister man and old spinning woman before me, crossing the threshold into that swarming temple of unknown darkness. I turned once to look at the outside world as the churchyard phosphorescence cast a sickly glow on the hilltop pavement, and as I did so, I shuddered. For though the wind had not left much snow, a few patches seemed, to my troubled eye, a few patches did remain on that path near the door, and in that fleeting backward look, it seemed to my troubled eye that they bore no mark of passing feet. Not even mine. The church was scarce lighted by all the lanterns that had entered it, for most of the throng had already vanished. They had streamed up the aisle between the high white pews to the trapdoor of the vaults which yawned loathsomely open just before the pulpit, and were now squirming noiselessly in. I followed dumbly down the foot-worn steps and into the dank, suffocating crypt. The tale of that sinuous line of night martyrs seemed very horrible, and as I saw them wriggling into a venerable tomb, they seemed more horrible still. Then I noticed that the tomb's floor had an aperture down which the throng was sliding, and in a moment we were all descending an ominous staircase of rough-hewn stone. A narrow, spiral staircase, damp and peculiarly odorous, that wound endlessly down into the bowels of the hill, past monotonous walls of dripping stone blocks and crumbling mortar. It was silent. Shocking descent. And I observed, after a horrible interval, that the walls and steps were changing in nature, as if chiseled out of the solid rock. What mainly troubled me was that the myriad footfalls made no sound, and set up no echoes. After more eons of descent, I saw some side passages, or burrows, leading from unknown recesses of blackness to this shaft of nighted mystery. Soon they became excessively numerous, like impious catacombs of nameless menace, and their pungent odor of decay grew quite unbearable. I knew we must have passed down through the mountain and beneath the earth of Kingsport itself, and I shivered that a town should be so aged and maggoty with subterraneous evil. Then I saw the lurid shimmering of pale light, and heard the insidious lapping of sunless waters. Again I shivered, for I did not like the things that the night had brought, and wished bitterly that no forefather had summoned me to this primal rite. As the steps and the passage grew broader, I heard another sound, the thin, whining mockery of a feeble flute. And suddenly, there spread out before me the boundless vista of an inner world, a vast fungus shore litten by a belching column of sick, greenish flame, and washed by a wide, oily river that flowed from abysses frightful and unsuspected to join the blackest gulfs of immemorial ocean. Alright, guys, we have an ad that is about to kick off, and what we have left is a little too far to finish on a snooze. So let's go ahead and let the ads run. I need to attend to a nosebleed that apparently just kicked up, which is strangely ominous. And we'll be back in just a moment. All right, we are back. That was an exceptionally strange little occurrence there. Hadn't had any sneezing and no blowing in the nose or anything, but just all of a sudden you sit there and like, I taste iron. Wait a minute, why do I taste iron? Yeah. So, let's go ahead and get through the last page or two of this. We're very near to the end. So, resuming from H.P. Lovecraft's The Festival. Fainting and gasping, I looked at that unhallowed Erebus of Titan toadstools, leprous fire and slimy water, and saw the cloaked throngs forming a semicircle around the blazing pillar. It was the Yule Rite, older than man and fated to survive him, the primal rite of the solstice and of spring's promise beyond the snows, the rite of fire and evergreen, light and music, and into that Stygian grotto I saw them do the rite, and adore the sick pillar of flame, and throw into the water handfuls of gouged out of the viscous vegetation which glittered green in the chlorotic glare. I saw this, and I saw something amorphously squatted far away from the light, piping noisomely on a flute. And as the thing piped, I thought I heard noxious, muffled flutterings in the fetid darkness where I could not see. But what frightened me most was that flaming column, spouting volcanically from depths profound and inconceivable, casting no shadows as healthy flame should, and coating the nitrous stone above with a nasty, venomous verdigris. For in all that seething combustion, no warmth lay, only the clamminess of death and corruption. The man who had brought me now squirmed to a point directly beside the hideous flame, and made stiff ceremonial motions to the semicircle he faced. At certain stages of the ritual they did groveling obeisance, especially when he held above his head that abhorrent Necronomicon he had taken with him. And I shared all the obeisances, because I had been summoned to this festival by the writings of my forefathers. Then the old man made a signal to the half-seen flute player in the darkness, which player thereupon changed its feeble drone to a scarce louder drone in another key, precipitating, as it did so, a horror unthinkable and unexpected. At this horror, I sank nearly to the lichened earth, transfixed with a dread not of this nor any world, but only of the mad spaces between the stars. Out of the unimaginable blackness beyond the gangrenous glare of that cold flame, out of the Tartarian leagues through which that oily river rolled uncanny, unheard, and unsuspected, there flopped rhythmically a horde of tame, trained, hybrid, winged things that no sound eye could ever wholly grasp, or sound brain ever wholly remember. They were not altogether crows, nor moles, nor buzzards, nor ants, nor vampire bats, nor decomposed human beings, but something I cannot and must not recall. They flopped limply along, half with their webbed feet and half with their membranous wings, and as they reached the throng of celebrants, the cowled figures seized and mounted them and rode off, one by one, along the reaches of that unlighted river into pits and galleries of panic, where poisoned springs feed frightful and undiscoverable cataracts. The old spinning woman had gone with the throng, and the old man remained only because I had refused when he motioned me to seize an animal and ride like the rest. I saw, when I staggered to my feet, that the amorphous flute player had rolled out of sight, but that two of the beasts were patiently standing by. As I hung back, the old man produced his stylus and tablet, and wrote that he was the true deputy of my fathers, who had founded the Yule worship in this ancient place, that it had been decreed I should come back, and that the most secret mysteries were yet to be performed. He wrote this in a very ancient hand. And when I still hesitated, he pulled from his loose robe a seal ring and a watch, both with my family arms, to prove that he was what he said. It was a hideous proof, because I knew from old papers that watch had been buried with my great-great-great-great-grandfather in 1698. Presently, the old man drew back his hood and pointed to the family resemblance in his face, but I only shuddered, because I was sure the face was merely a devilish waxen mask. The flopping animals were now scratching restlessly at the lichens, and I saw that the old man was nearly as restless himself. When one of the things began to waddle and edge away, he turned quickly to stop it, so the suddenness of his motion dislodged the waxen mask from what should have been his head. And then, because that nightmare's position barred me from the stone staircase down which we had come, I flung myself into the oily underground river that bubbled somewhere to the caves of the sea, flung myself into that putrescent juice of earth's inner horrors, before the madness of my screams could bring down upon me all the charnel legions these pest gulfs might conceal. At the hospital, they told me I had been found, half frozen, in Kingsport Harbor at dawn, clinging to the drifting spar that accident sent to save me. They told me I had taken the wrong fork of the hill road the night before and fallen over the cliffs at Orange Point, a thing they deducted from prints found in the snow. There's nothing I could say, because everything was wrong. Everything was wrong, with the broad window showing a sea of roofs in which only about 1 in 5 was ancient, and the sound of trolleys and motors in the streets below. They insisted that this was Kingsport. I could not deny it. When I went delirious at hearing that the hospital stood near the old churchyard on Central Hill, they sent me to St. Mary's Hospital in Arkham, where I could have better care. I liked it there, for the doctors were broad-minded, and even lent me their influence in obtaining the carefully sheltered copy of Al-Hazred's objectionable Necronomicon from the library of Miskatonic University. They said something about a psychosis, and agreed that I had better get my harassing obsessions out of my mind. So I read again that hideous chapter, and shuddered doubly, because it was indeed not new to me. I'd seen it before, let footprints tell what they might, and where it was I had seen it were best forgotten. There was no one in waking hours who could remind me of it, but my dreams are filled with terror, because of phrases I dare not quote. I dare quote only one paragraph, put into such English as I can make from the awkward low Latin. "The nethermost caverns," wrote the mad Arab, "are not for the fathoming of eyes that see, but their marvels are strange and terrific. Cursed the ground where dead thoughts live new and oddly bodied, and evil the mind that is held by no head." Wisely did Ibn Shakabak say that the happy is the tomb where no wizard hath lain, and happy the town at night whose wizards are all in ashes. For it is of old rumor that the soul of the devil-bought hastes not from his charnel clay, but fats and instructs the very worm that gnaws, till out of corruption horrid life springs, and the dull scavengers of earth wax crafty to vex it, and swell monstrous to plague it. Great holes secretly are digged where the earth's pores ought to suffice, and things have learnt to walk that ought to crawl. This looks like a spoiler tag, but I think it's a transcribed. Yeah, it's where it was transcribed from. Alright, that brings us to the end of the festival. We can get out of our reading nook for this one. So, that one was interesting. It reminded me of, if you remember when we read the horror at Red Hook, I think it was, where it's related to a lot of the Lovecraft stories, related to the mythos, but very definitively unique and standing alone. It's an isolated incident, but it also gives some extra connotations and associations. It's reminiscent of I think it was the Dunwich Horror, one of the first Lovecraft stories we read. The things older than time and coming from the depths, whether it be the depths of the sea or the depths of the pit itself. Very good, very good. I'm happy with that as our random selection for our second one. And yeah, the line about wizards shows up several times. It's one of the few parts of the Necronomicon that is actually ever translated for the reader to get. Other than that, it's all just the horrifically maddening text of the Mad Arab. And that's really all the description we usually get. So getting a bit of an excerpt is a rare treat. Alright guys, we have run a little over tonight, but we got through 2 of Lovecraft's stories. And this was a nice shift, a good return to form. I always love when we get into a little bit of the creepy malignancy and mystery of Lovecraft or things like the King in Yellow or the like. Not quite like a full dedicated story, but this is like the prototype of the creepypasta. It's the earliest form of the short story that could be viral and passed around, but just sends a shiver up your spine. I'm here for it. I'm here for it. Alright guys, let's see if there's anyone reading tonight. As always, I like to raid into other readers just to give us a little bit of a community feeling. Alright, this guy, let's see. This person is, Celicia Jace is reading a horror sci-fi fantasy novel. Are they reading or writing? It's hard telling. Yeah, exactly. Creepypasta was just the most recent incarnation. It's made much more accessible by virtue of just being in the internet. Okay, someone's writing. Creative writing. Revisions. Oh, Neff has been going for a bit. I think the last time we rated off to Neff, it was right at the end, which was unfortunate. Let me see. Not sure if he's reading or just hanging out. It's hard telling. Let's see. Someone who's reading about spooky lesbians. Timely. It is June. Writing BL, again, timely. A lot of options tonight, actually. More than we usually get. That's a rebroadcast of Wuthering Heights. Let me see if this one's going, if this is a reading or a writing. Just a moment. Okay, yeah. This is a new one. Let's see if she'll let us raid in. I'll hit the raid start button first. Alright, it looks like they will allow us. So, we're going to be raiding over to Salicia Jace, who is reading horror sci-fi fantasy novel, session number 12. So they're pretty deep, so we'll obviously be lost. But, all the same, I hope you give them our very best. As a fellow reader on Twitch, and really just as fellow people, we always give our best, right? Right! Alright. Until next time, we'll be back on Tuesday to continue our, to start a new book. I don't know what we're reading yet. We'll figure it out. I guess I should figure it out. Anyway, thank you for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed this foray back into the twisted, disturbed mind of H.P. Lovecraft. Until next time, thank you very much, and have a wonderful evening. Now let's give Salicia Jace our very best as we raid over now.
The doggies. Oh, thank you for the raid on that irving-rush. You're welcome, everyone. Well, you're doing writing and reading? Glad to see you.